What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday afternoon. Pleased to bring to you guys another Rip City Drive. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been named the NBA's MVP, averaging 32.7 points, 6 assists, and 5 boards per game, leading the West-leading Thunder this season. The Thunder cruised past the Minnesota Timberwolves 114-88 in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals last night. Shai led the way for OKC with 31 points and 9 assists. The Indiana Pacers and New York Knicks get underway in the East Conference Finals tonight. Tip-off is at 5 p.m. on TNT and Max. In a surprising twist, the tush push is not banned as it's in the NFL as it survives by 2 votes. Coming up on the big show, we'll be catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team, talking some NFL. We'll catch up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports in hour number 2, and then Ron Callan from Oregon State Radio in hour number 3. Rip City Drive on a Wednesday starts now.
It's time for the Rip City Drive, brought to you by Goldberg Jones. Divorce for Men. Call 1-800-DIVORCE. Featuring the crazy and often irrational longtime Portland radio vet, Chad Dewing.
The pitch. It hit him. It hit Will Smith. This is a tie game. Tommy Edman comes in to score. 2-1 to Muncie. Swings, hits a high drive to center field. This is going to do it. Tawa going back. He's going to make the catch. Ohtani tags. He will score, and the Dodgers walk it off for the 4th time this year. Max Muncy's sacrifice fly wins it for the Dodgers. 4-3 final score.
Swung on, that's hammered out towards left field and deep. On its way, she goes. It's gone. Oppo Taco for Corbin Carroll. Number 15 on the season, and the D-backs take a 3-1 lead.
Gilgeous-Alexander 10 to shoot, 4.5 on the game clock. Sets up Dub, corner right Dort. Tees up a rainbow 3 that's up and in. Cha-ching at Thunder money ball. Lou comes through. Russo 7 to shoot, he does. An angle left 3 that's up and in. Cha-ching at Thunder money ball, and those are finishing touches tonight, baby. Caruso blows a kiss to the crowd. The Thunder on their way to a Game 1 win up 104-86. OKC down 8-0 to start by as many as 9 in the opening half. Wallop the Wolves in Game 1, 114-88. A resounding message sent by the top-seeded Thunder as they pick off the Wolves in Game 1 decisively, 114-88.
Strap in. The Rip City Drive with Chad Dewing starts now.
Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. No, it's not Chad Dewing. Brendan Slaughter back on the mic until Chad Dewing gets back later in the week. Hope everyone's having a good middle of the week so far. Lots to get into here on the big show today. Like I mentioned in the update, we'll be catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team here in just about 20 minutes. Want to get his thoughts on the tush push. Want to get his thoughts on Nick Sirianni's contract extension. Also want to get his take on what I thought was a pretty good draft class for the Seattle Seahawks over the draft. So a lot of things we want to get into with Dan, so that'll be a good conversation. Hour 2, we're going to catch up with Carter Baines, CBS Sports, good friend of mine. Excited to talk some Beaver baseball, some NBA, a little bit of everything with Carter, some Blazers as well. And then we'll wrap up the show in Hour 3, catching up with Ron Callan, Oregon State radio voice. Typically women's basketball voice, Ron Callan, but also does some baseball filled in and obviously does football as well for the Beaver Sports broadcast. So excited to talk to Ron about the Beavers taking down Long Beach State. He was on the call filling in for Mike Parker and just getting his thoughts as we get closer and closer to Selection Monday. But have to start with the big news today. And I was originally, prior to showing up today, thought that was going to be, talking about the tush push. And believe me, we will talk about that because caught me by surprise. As I said yesterday, I really expected it not to survive moving forward, just kind of given the chatter we'd heard across the league. And yet, nevertheless, it survives by 2 votes. Somehow they figured it out and had the right cadence to, speak to the owners in a certain way. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show as well. But big news. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander named the NBA's MVP. Again, considering the year that he had, the year that the Thunder had, I don't think it's too surprising that he got the nod over Nikola Jokic. I think, as I mentioned, Jokic still pound for pound my best basketball player in the world, but I think this year Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had one heck of a season. And one of my favorite things to do is to go back and look back, and it's worth revisiting, folks, just how bad that trade looks for the Los Angeles Clippers, as time has gone on. So let's jump back in the time machine, go back to, 2019, or excuse me, 2019, yes, when he was still a member of the Los Angeles Clippers. So as we all remember, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was drafted by the Hornets with the 11th pick in the 2018 draft, immediately traded to the Clippers on draft night for Miles Bridges. So he was a Clipper, spent his first rookie year with the Clippers, led the Clippers to the 8th seed, where they ended up playing the Warriors that year and put up a really spirited effort. And I remember that was a really kind of fun, spunky Clipper team to root for. And he was kind of the charge behind it. He was definitely still finding his own as a rookie, but you could kind of tell he definitely had an it factor. But again, just 10 points or just under 11 points a game, 3 assists, just under 3 rebounds. Again, numbers that wouldn't necessarily indicate gigantic future stardom. So, from the perspective of the Clippers, when Oklahoma City decided to blow it up, that was shortly after we mentioned the other day when Dame waved them goodbye. What a glorious, glorious moment, Dame waving them goodbye. But nevertheless, after that happened, Sam Presti, Thunder GM, he went to work and, proceeded to start to make moves to trade, right? I mean, can't remember the exact order of operations in which everything, kind of happened for them that time around. But, Russell Westbrook was eventually, traded to the Rockets. And, then you had Paul George put up to, kind of the highest bidder. And I think, the Thunder were definitely selective, wanting to trade away at the time. Was, a borderline, I don't know if Paul George was quite MVP level at the time, but you would kind of put him up there as really being that kind of key number 2 guy that everybody wanted. I mean, I think back to around that time when everybody said Paul George would have been a terrific fit along Damian Lillard, so on and so forth. Paul George has a lot of good fits, a lot of places. He was a good player. He still can be when he's healthy, but he's getting up there in age as well. But here's the key with that. They get Kawhi Leonard, right, that offseason as a free agent. And, the kind of handshake, wink, nod is, hey, go get me. I don't know if it was exactly go get me Paul George or if it was, go get me a star to play alongside with. And Paul George is what they came back with. But, Steve Ballmer, no is not in the vocabulary when it comes to, assets and things to trade. And it is still worth looking back that they traded, again, Paul George to the Clippers to team up with Kawhi Leonard and that cast of characters trying to make a run at it now, which was, goodness, already, 6 years ago. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, who immediately was shipped out of Oklahoma City, didn't spend much time there. 5 first-round picks and the rights to swap picks twice. So essentially 7 first-round picks. And we've never seen that since. I mean, we've seen Kevin Durant get traded a couple times, and, Durant's brought back 5 first-round picks. That's, significant. But we still haven't seen the level of Paul George. It was what I dare to say broke the needle when you have 7 first-round picks plus a guy like Shai. So that's really like 8, which is just mind-boggling. But, from there, we obviously know how good Shai Gilgeous-Alexander came out to be. He kind of steadily grew with the young Thunder as they started their path to rebuild. And I think the thing that's most significant is, you saw that, Danilo Gallinari, he spent a little bit of time there, played decently, and then they ended up trading him away. But the key is I wanted to check back in on these picks. So their first pick that they got was a 2021 first rounder from Miami. It ended up as the 18th pick. They selected Trey Mann. Trey Mann's not really in Oklahoma City's rotation. Maybe their one, quote, miss out of this. 2022, the Clippers gave them a pick that came in at number 12. They drafted Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. It turned out to maybe be one of the biggest steals we've seen in the mid-range recently. 2023 was another one that was coming in from Miami via the Clippers. There's a lot of complication, like as far as like renegotiated rights with Miami and so on and so forth. So, it's I don't exactly know how it's renegotiated, but I think it's going to parlay into a future pick. But nevertheless, still to come. They have the right to swap with the Clippers this year. Not all that valuable with the Clippers making the playoffs. So the Thunder, instead of being, 28, 29, or 27, 28, 29, or 30, have a chance to swap with the Clippers, who are a little bit higher, having made the playoffs, but not made it deep into the playoffs. And then You've still got 2025 first round pick, lottery protected from Miami that becomes unprotected in 2026. Again, we'll see what the Heat look like. Another second round pick coming in from Atlanta, and then another unprotected first rounder with the Clippers in 2026. So it's almost just mind boggling to see just how the Thunder continue to strike gold. I mean, you have to nail your draft pick, sure, but when you, as I mentioned yesterday, it makes it a lot easier when you already have your alpha in tow. And I think, it's hard to say when, again, a guy that averaged under 11 points a game, 3 boards, 3 rebounds, or 3 assists, excuse me, and in his first year would turn and end up being an MVP, years down the line. And you don't know that. That's potential and all those things. But considering Paul George and the Kawhi Leonard experiment didn't turn out, and maybe I'm not going to say the best grouping of the Clippers in recent memory turned out to be this year, but they were relevant this year with Harden and Norman Powell and, some other pieces, obviously Kawhi Leonard as well. But in hindsight, it doesn't look good. I know they thought they were going to have a real chance to push, but you think of Kawhi's injuries, Paul George's injuries, and, I don't think, I don't think you can be as successful, and believe me, and I say successful, as Steve Ballmer is and have, regrets. Maybe you have a few, but, as successful as Steve Ballmer is, and I don't think you let regrets get you an awful lot, but it does make me wonder, like, man, what if we just, like, stayed the course and, like, maybe we're a little patient. We all know Kawhi's knees are Kawhi's knees, and Kawhi is still playing, still on the team now. Imagine if the Clippers had just been like, it's okay. Kawhi Leonard does have a limited window, but that window is still 6 to 7 years as he's still playing now. Maybe not an MVP level, but he's still a pretty darn good player. And if they had, and now we have Shea already arriving at MVP level, could he have done that with the Clippers? Hard to say. I mean, Tyronn Lue is a really good coach, and he's been there the whole time, so I think it's possible. But man, if the Clippers had just been patient and said, "All right, we've got Kawhi Leonard," and again, easier said than done. Kawhi Leonard's demand was kind of to get another star, right? And Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was your biggest chip to get another star. But if you somehow could have sold him on the, hey, just be patient. We'll go easy on your knees. You just want a championship, so on and so forth. Easy peasy. We'll wait for this young kid to develop, and we're going to be really, really good with an amazing 1-2 punch. They didn't take. They took the kind of big swing route. So I guess that's kind of the other side of the coin. Is you don't always know if even the big swing's gonna win, right? In this case, who didn't think that was like a totally like, just like wow trade from the Clippers at the time? It was like, okay, you give up on your young first round pick and then a bunch of picks because you're going to get Paul George. You are pushing all your chips in. And we're seeing now that young kid they traded away, he's now MVP. How many MVPs Paul George has? Nada. Crazy world we're living in the NBA. You got the Rip City Drive coming up. We've got Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. Excited to talk to Dan about the tush push, surviving to see another days, another years, in a couple years. I'm curious to see when the discussion is tabled until. Lots of other thoughts with Dan checking in on the Seahawks as well. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. Brendan Slaughter with you this afternoon. Pleased to welcome on our next guest. He's from the 33rd team covering the NFL, Dan Pizzuta. Dan, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. Appreciate you taking some time to jump on and talk some ball. Lots of things I want to pick your brain on, Dan, but we got to start with kind of the big news today, at least surprise from what I've been reading coming into it. The tush push lives.
Yeah, it does. And I think that makes sense. I don't really understand where the ground to try to get it banned really stood. I understand there are a lot of people in the league who just don't like it visually, which is fine. But I think if you go back and look at what a lot of the Eagles were doing, they could do pretty much the same thing without the push being a part of that play. It would look very similar. They would still, I think, almost every third or fourth and one would still be going for it. So I don't think a ban even would have changed too much significantly about what the Eagles would have done. So I think there's really no data that shows that the injuries are higher on that play. And just watching it, it's very hard to see how an injury concern really is there. It's basically just a quarterback sneak where Jalen Hurts is very good at finding where the opening is for him to gain that yard or two. So I'm happy just for a stance where I don't know why that play really would have been banned, for there be reasons for it other than, Roger Goodell or a couple of other teams in the league just don't like it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It seemed like there was quite a bit of momentum, to at least look at it. I think of, Frankie Louvu saying, just within the last couple of days, called it a cheat code play and all these things. And it was just kind of interesting. And I kind of put it in my head. I'm like, well, we've seen, advantages taken away kind of in the NFL before. And I kind of saw both sides of it. But at the same token, I also kind of respected, Dan, the side of where people are like, don't let the Eagles get to a third and short or fourth and short. Your defense got to be better, right?
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things. You either don't allow the Eagles to get to third or fourth down and only 1 yard to go, which they've been so good at doing over the past few years, or learn to do it yourselves. And I think one of the things of why I think we can say that it is kind of a skill other than just kind of something that is just this cheat code is we haven't really seen other teams be able to successfully pull it off. We've seen only a few teams even try, which I think just goes to show you if it's not being practiced very well, a lot of teams don't even feel comfortable trying it in a game. And I think that just goes to show that it's not just, if it was just because of the push from behind, then that's one thing. But I think if you go back and look at all of these Eagles plays that they've been running, and I did that over the past, a couple of days, looking at really the past 2 years, it's so much of what that offensive line is doing up front. And that is what really is making this play so successful. Rarely is the push the thing that really gives them that yard or so that they need. Sometimes it's, it gives them a second yard if they've already picked something up on a third and one. But the leverage the offensive line gets is what is really important. That's what sticks out for Philly. And I think that's why it's so hard for a lot of these other teams to replicate it. And if it was just as easy as having a tight end or, Saquon Barkley stand behind the quarterback and push him down the first down marker, we would see a lot more teams doing it, but it's not that easy.
Right. No, and I wholeheartly agree with you, Dan. For starters, not everybody can squat what Jalen Hurts squats. I was kind of talking about it a little bit yesterday is, just off the top of my head, for example, that's not necessarily something like a guy like Lamar Jackson would be doing. I could maybe see Josh Allen and the Bills trying to do, because he's a very big body, big frame guy who takes some hits too. But, it does seem something that's kind of like the Eagles have kind of crafted it to kind of be unique to them in a bit of a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many things that are unique to it. Obviously, the quarterback does play a big part, who they have behind him. But I really want to emphasize how much that offensive line just being so good and so well taught, because I think we saw from, 2 years ago when Jason Kelsey was the one running it, and we you kind of think that, him being the center, being such a focal point of that is what made it good. And then he retires. They still stay, as good as they were this past year. And I think it's just because it's so well taught. They really know what they're doing up there. That offensive line just in general is five pieces working as one, better than any other team in the league, pretty much across all plays. But this one especially, which again, I think the singularity of that offensive line makes it so much harder for some of these other teams to try to pull off.
We're catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team here on Rip City Radio. Dan, appreciate your time. A couple more things I want to get your thoughts on. Obviously the other big news this week is, flag football and the fact that, there's going to be, a partnership between the NFL and Olympics. And it sounds like, we're going to see some athletes play. It seems like we've seen, kind of the people like Justin Jefferson who seem really excited, A.J. Brown, who's like, not so much. So I'm kind of curious, just your initial thoughts to kind of the NFL reaching maybe a different audience in a kind of bit of a way.
Yeah, I mean, it should be fun. I think what I've seen proposed is, there's going to be, at max, I think like one guy per team. So I think it should be it's just a fun kind of way to show off what the NFL will be able to do with some of these athletes playing in a kind of a new version of football, because obviously flag and just the way it's set up is going to be very different. I will be really interested in seeing some of the other, fringe guys who probably won't be, the 5 or 7 guys who, go to Team USA, but who might be able to kind of like we've seen in like a World Baseball Classic, where you're not necessarily from that country, but you're able to represent your country in some flags. So I'm going to be interested to see kind of how the rest of the field outside of the USA does turn out too, because I think that'll be a fun thing to expand the game a little more. And obviously that has been something that the NFL has been working on with all these international games and just kind of everything they can do to try to expand this game internationally.
Definitely. And I think there's definitely the positives have been thrown out there quite a bit. I mean, when you look at this, Dan, do you see any negatives? Do you see a situation where a player could be like, wanting to chase after that gold medal and, there's been, talk that the calendar could overlap. You could maybe see a guy, miss training camp. That's nothing new, ask Aaron Rodgers. But, like, do you think there's going to be kind of some handshake agreements like, hey, you're going to get a gold medal, might miss, like, week 1 of training camp kind of thing?
I mean, yeah, that would probably be possible, but obviously it's not, where they're sitting out where they, wouldn't be doing any football activities. This would be very actively playing football. I think the first injury we see, if any of that happens, then no NFL player goes back probably ever again. So I think like that is obviously going to be the type of injury you're going to have these high level athletes who, because they are taking this very seriously, will be going, 100% at all times. So there's always going to be some type of injury risk there. So I think that is something that, you probably do have to think about. Obviously, without the contact, it does make it, less likely, but still with how quickly you're kind of running around, maybe trying to plant a little more than you would trying to make someone miss a tackle, trying to, have someone miss a flag. So I think there obviously is an injury risk for that. And I think that's something the NFL is now, is going to monitor, but something probably comfortable enough with that they have allowed this to go forward. But I would say probably if there is any injury, that it's probably the last time we do see NFL players heading into the Olympics.
Right. I think that's significant. I mean, I was just like thinking about like, the comparison with like the NBA and, you don't always see, it's the timing. The schedule is different, right? But I mean, occasionally there are guys who decide not to, participate in the Olympics because they want to get ready for the next season. So I was just kind of curious to see how that is. And I tend to agree with you, maybe nothing like an ankle, but to your point, if you get like an ACL injury or something that's going to take some time, right? That would definitely, I see where you're coming from and definitely agree. Catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team here on Rip City Drive. Also want to talk about Nick Sirianni. He cashed in on the Super Bowl win, got the extension. Quite the turnaround compared to, what Philly fans were thinking about him after the wild card loss to Tampa. Dan, is it just these razor thin margins? If you win, everything's taken care of?
Yeah, I think so, especially for a coach like Sirianni, who is kind of, as someone who right now is not the offensive play caller, obviously not the defensive play caller. So one of these kind of CEO head coaches, if the vibes are going well, then you're doing pretty well as a coach. So obviously this is a very talented team that was able to kind of reach its talent. And I think he did have definitely a part in kind of righting that ship and allowing some of allowing a Kellen Moore to expand a little bit more of the offense than what Sirianni and Brian Johnson had run the previous year. Obviously, just kind of letting someone as legendary as Vic Fangio just come in and do whatever Fangio wanted to do, and neither one of those hires I think were really his idea. It seemed like it kind of came down from the front office, but being able to kind of to manage that, take a team that had such bad vibes coming off of, like you said, that loss, and not only just that loss, it was the whole second half of the season when they had about 10-1 at some point, and then just a complete crater. So be able to kind of rally the team again to make sure it's getting the most out of its talent, and it wasn't always doing that at points last year. And I think we do have to remember that, even though they did go on quite a run in the second half of the season, this is a team that started 2-2, and to be able to take that team and still keep everything on the rails, I think is a testament to what Sirianni is able to do as a head coach, what he does bring to the table, even if he's not one of these play caller type that we might view as someone who is like more in charge of an organization. But I think we will see that he did get a lot of goodwill by how this season did go.
Catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team here on Rip City Radio. A couple more questions for you, Dan. Going back just a little bit to the NFL draft now that we've had some time just to kind of reflect on it. I'm curious, just a couple teams maybe who caught your eye as having really good drafts, and maybe a couple teams who were like, maybe not so good.
Oh, that's a good one. So I think obviously the Patriots stand out as one. I think they were very popular team that people thought that they did really well. I just think the way they kind of brought everything around, especially what they needed on offense, getting a tackle, and you kind of do that by default just because you were outside of the top 3 picks there. But, getting a guy like, Kyle Williams, who can, I think, be an immediate impact guy as wide receiver, Travion Henderson, I think is going to fit really well. Potentially getting a starting offensive lineman at center in Jared Wilson. When you can, hit in potentially the first 3 rounds like that, you're setting yourself up to be pretty good. The Raiders are a team that I liked a lot, and I didn't see quite as high scores, and I think we can, debate whether going into the draft, I didn't think they were a great Aston-Genty place just because I'm not sure that offensive line is really set up to be the type of place where a running back can immediately succeed. I would have liked them to maybe see a couple steps there, but I mean, he is an outstanding player who I think will make an impact. And then it's coming after that, getting Jack back, I think is going to be a very fun fit in that offense. Darian Porter is a cornerback out of Iowa State, one of my favorite players in this draft. Just 6'4", huge, fast, converted wide receiver. Didn't have a lot of snaps, but I think just fell to a perfect place coming in with Pete Carroll, where I think he is going to be a very fun fit in there. Kind of has like the Tariq Woolen type of vibe of just big, fast guy, converted receiver who does have the ball skills and just locks down receivers on the outside, which I think he can be a potential fit there. So that was one of my favorite ones. I think, Kansas City too, I think did a really good job of bringing in some guys who are just going to, I think, make a bit of an impact, potentially getting an offensive tackle in the first round. There's 2 defensive linemen that they got on day 2. I think are going to help a lot. Good cornerback, Jalen Royals, I think could be potentially fun. So I think those are the 3 that I think really stood out to me coming out of the draft.
For sure. Couple, you mentioned obviously the Raiders and Pete Carroll and some interesting headlines this week with Chip Kelly and wanting to change Aston Genty's stance. Dan, I won't pretend to be enough of a football expert to be like, oh, yeah, I know that stance is so much better. Talk to me like I'm five with this. Like, is this that big of a deal when you're Ashton Genty and you've ran the ball a certain way and almost put up Heisman numbers running the ball a certain way? Or is this just kind of how coaches do things in the NFL?
No, I'm sure it's just something that's going to potentially make his life a little easier. It's going to be one of those things that it can be a very big talking point in May. And by the time, even training camp comes around, like no one's really going to think of it.
Right.
So I think just because there's not a lot going on right now, that's going to be grabbing headlines. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting because I clicked on the headline. I'm like, interesting. Like let's look at this, and even Genty's like, well, I'll listen to him. He's the coach, but I still want to try to change his mind again back. And I was like, this will be interesting to kind of just casually keep an eye on. But nevertheless, just wanted to get your take on it. Moving along, Dan, have you seen a quarterback room in an offseason as interesting or unique as Cleveland's is at this moment? Like just in your years of covering the NFL.
No. And I'm not, interesting. Sure. It'll be fine. I guess. Like, I don't know how much of an impact we're going to be talking about this, the QB room to where there's someone who is really going to, break out and show up and really matter to a point. So I think what's going to happen is I think right now this Cleveland quarterback room is probably going to get a lot more attention than it deserves from kind of a talent and efficiency and production standpoint of what this quarterback room is going to actually look like and, produce on the field in 2025. So I think we are going to get a lot of talking points out of this, but in terms of it actually being interesting football-wise, I think it's a very big gap between those two things.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with you, Dan. Just a couple more things before we let you go. Appreciate your time once again. Just your thoughts on Brock Purdy's extension. It seems to be a little bit polarizing amongst even fans, media members. Like everyone kind of seems to have an opinion on it. He comes out to $265 million in the extension. Where do you land on? Was it too much? Was it just right? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's kind of one of those things where I think you kind of look at, the average value, and that's always going to be bumped up a little bit but for him to be around where the Jared Goff deal was with, another year added on, it's like the same 3-year cash. And that's one of the big things that like actually matter in a contract, where the 3-year cash flow kind of shows how much real money is in the contract early on. So I think when we do see some of the details and the actual structure of this contract, we will see it's probably a little more front loaded than it would be, which I think will give the 49ers, some out once you get into year 4, year 5. And I think, he definitely has improved as a quarterback, and I think there was a lot more on his plate this past season than there were, the previous years when he really was just getting the benefit of how much of a kind of a Death Star this offense was. But last year he was doing a little more in the straight dropback game. He was creating more on his own. I think handling pressure better. So I think he is one of these quarterbacks that I think you'll be able to win with some pieces around him. And I think that is something that San Francisco is still able to get around. I think especially when you look at what they did last year with how many injuries they had just all over the place between the offensive line, between McCaffrey not playing a lot, the torn ACL for Brandon Ayuk. There are still some, even with the losses that they had and having to get rid of Debo, there are still a lot of very good pieces on this offense, especially. So I'm not buying that this is really kind of a rebuild, and this contract is not going to be something that holds San Francisco down, because I think they do still have some good pieces. They've been able to manage their cap in a way that it's not going to be something where he's making, $70 million and they can't pay some guys. I think the guys that they get rid of, like a Debo, that probably was going to happen regardless of what that contract was going to be. So I don't think it's something that is going to really weigh down San Francisco in the terms of how their team building, because I think they have been a couple steps ahead here, getting in a Ricky Pearsall and getting Juwan Jennings
Right.
on a contract extension and completely outplaying that. So I think there's still a lot of value there on that offense that I think is still going to be very well orchestrated. So it's a fine contract for the type of player that he is at a market rate that we have seen other quarterbacks like him get paid to this point. If he was going to be pushing for, Josh Allen or even the Dak contract that, Dallas just waited way too long to be doing, and that's why that's so high. If it was going to be pushed to that level, then I think that's something where you probably would have had, pump some brakes on what San Francisco would be able to do. But where it came out, I think it is totally just kind of completely rational for where he is, where the 49ers are, and where the quarterback market has been.
Absolutely. I said it just was curious because it was definitely something that was out there, and I tend to agree with you too. It's not a ridiculous number around Jared Goff is solid. Just last thing, real quick, Dan, before we let you go, appreciate your time. Just on a grade scale, what would you grade Seattle's draft and offseason? How have you like what the Hawks been able to do so far?
It's interesting. There are some things that I have really liked about what they've done. Obviously, getting Grezabel and Eminwari, I think they're definitely helpful. I mean, obviously, throwing the dart at Jalen Milroe is going to be interesting. I do still have concerns about what Sam Darnold is going to be behind that offensive line.
Sure.
I think kind of there's a lot of faith being put into what Clint Kubiak can do with his system to kind of stop that interior offensive line, especially from being the weakness that it has been, and stop kind of Sam Darnold from having some of the downturns and the struggles that we've seen when he does see pressure. And for as good as the situation was last year for Darnold in Minnesota, by a lot of kind of like advanced metrics, he was about a league average quarterback, and that was a lot because he was still putting the ball in harm's way, whether it was intercepted or not, and still was not handling pressure as well as you would like. And I think he's going to be seeing that a little more in Seattle. So I am a little concerned how all of that is going to fit together. But I do think I do like what they're doing on defense. Getting Ernest Jones back on the deal that they did at linebacker, one of my favorite contracts of the offseason. I think that was a great move. So I do like what they're doing structurally on defense. I do have a lot of concerns about the offense, but having kind of that Jalen Milroe card to kind of play in their pocket, it makes it a little more interesting. So at least there is potentially an out if this does not go, as well as they had hoped early in the season.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like I said, I would kind of phrase it the same way. It's kind of like, interesting. They move off Geno, they make the moves that they do, and we'll see. But nevertheless, Dan, appreciate your time. It was great to catch up, my friend, and look forward to talking some more ball down the line with you.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. Love talking with Dan. As knowledgeable as anybody is. His analysis is awesome. Make sure to check out his content at the 33rd team. And also, before we take a break, we have a pair of Hops tickets to give away here on Rip City Radio. We got a 4-pack to see the Hops take on Everett this Saturday at Hillsborough Ballpark. Call now. 503-248-0620. Again, 503-248-0620. A 4-pack of tickets to see the Hillsborough Hops. We'll also be talking about it next segment if we don't get anybody in between. But a 4-pack of tickets to the Hops on deck. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. Big shout out to Dan Pizzuta for joining us last segment, talking about a whole bunch of different things. You know, the tush push, getting his thoughts on the Seahawks, his thoughts on that crazy, wacky Cleveland Browns quarterback room. So much to catch up with Dan, and appreciate him joining us on the program. A couple other things we're going to get to here in just a couple minutes. Want to talk some audio. We got some audio from Roger Goodell and Justin Jefferson talking about the Olympics. And again, we were talking about that with Dan as well. Flag football coming in to the Olympics 2028. We will see NFL athletes. And let's hear from Roger Goodell.
I think this news represents a great opportunity for the sport, for the NFL. It's truly the next step in making NFL football and football a global sport for men and women of all ages and all opportunities across the globe. We think that's the right thing to do, and this is a big step in accomplishing that. For our players, we think it's a tremendous opportunity for them to represent their country, to compete for a gold medal, which is the pinnacle of global sports. It's something that I think all professional athletes, and we have two here today that will speak to this, that across many different sports, the opportunity to play for your country and to win a gold medal or any medal is a wonderful and an honor to be able to do.
Roger Goodell also talked about the international market, and you talk about how the NFL continues to play a lot of games in Europe. We've seen the NFL Mexico game, see the Sao Paulo game this last year. I think that there's something to, the Olympics, which is a worldwide phenomena, also getting in the international market. Roger Goodell talked about that as well.
I think the potential for us to grow is there. It's the greatest opportunity for growth. I mean, we already have 200+ million fans here in the States. So we're not giving up on the States and continuing to expand here. But the international is just, it's an open market for us. We're introducing the game. We're sharing our game, and the fans are reacting to it in an extraordinary way. So we're excited about our potential. Yes, I do see 16 regular season games. I think that will happen sometime in the very near future.
Roger Goodell talking about the international market there as well. One more clip I want to get to. Justin Jefferson, Vikings star receiver and arguably the best skill position player in the league, had this to say about the chance to play in the Olympics.
Think about the chances of playing in the Olympics and getting a gold medal is a dream. Just reverting back to being a kid and watching the track and field meets, watching basketball win the gold medal. So that's something that as a kid I always wanted to be a part of, but football wasn't globally. So now that we're expanding the game and we're going more globally, it's pretty cool.
Justin Jefferson, Vikings receiver, talking about just how cool it's going to be to compete for a gold medal. And, I think it's going to be interesting. We'll see, like Dan said, I think an injury could definitely damper this quite a bit. But, we avoid injury for a couple of years, could get some fun stuff. So I'm excited for the Olympics, LA 2028, to see some of these NFL players. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting into hour number 2. We'll be talking more Indiana Knicks as they get underway tonight on Max at 5 o'clock, just about an hour away from first tip there. Then we'll be catching up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports, talking some Oregon State baseball, maybe some Oregon State football, maybe even a little NBA, get his thoughts on the Blazers as well, and so much more. Ron Callan later in hour number 3. You got the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been named the NBA's MVP, averaging 32.7 points, 6 assists, and 5 boards per game, leading the Thunder. The Oklahoma City Thunder cruised past the Timberwolves 114-88 in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals. Shai led the way for OKC with 31 points and 9 assists. The Indiana Pacers and New York Knicks get underway in the East Conference Finals tonight. Tip-off is at 5 o'clock on TNT and Max. And in a surprising twist, the tush push is not banned, and the NFL as it survives by 2 votes. Coming up on the big show, we'll be catching up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports, talking a little bit of everything. And then Ron Callan from Oregon State Radio. You got Rip City Drive on a Wednesday. Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. Hour number 2 coming up. Brendan Slaughter with you guys. Hope you're having a great day so far. Big shout out to Dan Pizzuta in the last hour for joining us here on the big show. Talked about a whole bunch of things with Dan, including flag football, including the tush push. I liked his thoughts on the Seahawks. Also gave us his take on that wacky Cleveland Browns quarterback room. He's like, maybe meant to grab some headlines, but ain't going to do much on the football field. And to be perfectly honest, we'll see. Rookie quarterbacks, how all that goes. So I'm curious to see what happens there. But that was a good conversation with Dan. Let's go ahead and switch gears here now, as we're just about an hour away from the start of the Knicks and Pacers Game 1 at the Garden tonight on TNT and Max. Very curious to see how this game unfolds. The Knicks come in as a 4.5 point favorite, and at the Garden, I give them the advantage early on, but I don't think it's quite as obvious as yesterday, where I really felt confident the Thunder were going to kind of run away with that game. So nevertheless, we'll see, and we'll be previewing that game a little bit more as the show goes on. But the Thunder do get the 114-88 win over the Timberwolves last night. Let's go ahead and hear from Anthony Edwards on the Timberwolves side of things on what quite did not work last night.
I definitely got to shoot more. I only took 13 shots, but I'll say probably just get off the ball a little more, play without the ball. I think that'll be the answer, because playing on the ball, they're just going to double and sit in the gaps all day. So got to go watch some film and pick it apart. We'll figure it out.
Again, like I mentioned yesterday, the supreme confidence for Anthony Edwards. He's like, I got to shoot more. I'm a shooting guard, right? He's like, we'll figure it out. He also did turn his ankle in that game as well. Here was his thoughts on if it affected his shooting.
Did your ankle affect your shooting at all?
You get a quick nah. So then again, that's just Anthony Edwards again, just being Anthony Edwards. And he talked about what they were able to do to kind of slow him down and make it really hard for him to get to the rim.
They clog the paint. That's what they do. They don't got much size down there, so they bank on us not making shots, I guess. Because every time I go to the rim, it's like 4 people in the paint. So, yeah, I guess they just be clogging the paint. They put like 4 bodies in the paint, make you kick it out.
So that tells me the Thunder are going to have to hit shots the Timberwolves are going to have to hit shots from the outside to have a chance, because he's right. The Thunder, aren't the biggest team in the world. Chet Holmgren is obviously their kind of quote rim protector, but he's not a massive frame by any means, and they're not the biggest team out there. So that's kind of what OKC's choosing to give the Timberwolves. So they're going to have to hit some shots. We also can hear from Chris Finch, Timberwolves head coach, in this game as well. He talked a little bit about the Anthony Edwards ankle injury.
He said it was a bit sore at halftime, but he said he would be fine. So yeah. No, we didn't talk about it yet. So.
Again, when I think a lot of us got that push notification, Anthony Edwards rolled the ankle. People are like, oh no, another injury this postseason. Probably was a little sore. Probably didn't feel great this morning, but nothing. It sounded like is long term. And then there was this part too. Chris Finch got asked about whether or not he felt Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was the recipient of a friendly whistle.
Coach, because you sense some of the frustrations that some of your players had with some of the calls that Shea was able to draw?
Yeah, there was a lot of frustration out there, but we know we talked about that before the series started, and we have to be able to kind of put that aside and get on with the next play mentality. So.
Chris Finch definitely admitting that, it's not unheard of, right? The MVP maybe getting the benefit of a whistle or two, but you got to rise above that if you want to win the game. And I think Chris Finch kind of mentioned, maybe that kind of frustrated their guys a little bit. Other side of the coin, the Thunder victorious in this game, I should say. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, this was before he was named MVP. He talked about the differences in playing the Timberwolves versus the Nuggets.
Did you feel that at all during the game, that you have to remind yourself, oh, this isn't Denver anymore?
It felt different from jump. They're more like pressure-oriented. It feels like a little more physical. But at the end of the night, it's basketball. They throw you a problem and you have to solve it, whatever it looks like. And that's what it is every night, and that's what it was tonight. They had different coverages, different personnel out there, and we have to attack it and work together as a unit to solve the problems out there, and we did that.
Shea Gilgeous-Alexander talking about how it just felt different, right, playing the Nuggets, and that's obviously true, right? You have a situation where it just, the temperature gets dialed up a degree, right? When you go from the conference semifinals to the conference finals. I mean, I remember obviously a few years back when the Portland Trailblazers beat the Nuggets to go to the conference finals, and it's just a different energy. It's a different energy. You get basketball casuals who, don't maybe pay attention to the early part of the NBA season or the 82-game regular season who, as soon as like conference semis to conference finals start to show up, and you start to see a lot more people just casually talking about the NBA than maybe the regular season too. So, that's, definitely something interesting. And, the best players can turn it up when it matters most, man. And Shea has proven to be a guy who can do that. But it was surprising to me because when I was talking to y'all, obviously Rip City Drive goes until 6 o'clock, which was, the good chunk of that first quarter. Minnesota looked great. And, as I went home, I'm like, wow, okay, maybe Minnesota's going to, sneak this one out and have a chance. And then they kind of turned it on from there. Thunder head coach Mark Daigneault talked a little bit about that slow first quarter.
I thought that was the game, for us, to play as poorly as we did offensively in the first half and to be down 4 was a major victory for us at halftime. And the defense was a huge catalyst in that.
So again, not the best first half for the Thunder at all. Then they obviously were able to, turn it on in that second half and play much better basketball. But, considering that Anthony Edwards' injury is not expected to be anything too long term, I still think the Thunder or the Timberwolves have a chance in this series. As I mentioned yesterday, I didn't really think that was the prime game for Minnesota to win. Again, if Anthony Edwards is limited moving forward, you can kind of bow tie this series. I think without Anthony Edwards being at his best, the Timberwolves don't have much of a chance. However, if the ankle injury is nothing that will affect him too much, I said that the best opportunity for the Timberwolves to steal a game would probably be game 2. We've seen the Thunder be kind of up and down at times, not always be playing the best basketball. So I think there's an opportunity there. But, if they go down 2-0, you go back to Minneapolis, obviously then you have to win 2 in a row. So it's going to be very interesting. I think the Timberwolves kind of showed early on, and especially at halftime, they can play with the Thunder, but there's still, more growth that is ultimately going to be needed. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter, again, coming up in just about 10 minutes. We're going to be catching up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports, talking some Oregon State baseball. We'll talk some postseason. We'll talk a little Oregon State football, maybe some NBA. Carter's a big Blazers supporter too, so we'll get his thoughts on a couple Blazer-related things. But nevertheless, it's very interesting to see what has transpired in one game of the conference finals, and I'm very excited for this Knicks-Pacers game tonight because I think these are two teams that have fought a lot to get to where they are. Right? They had to take out some pretty big players along the way. I think obviously the Knicks with Boston, and then obviously the Cavs or the Pacers dispatching the Cavs in relatively quick order. That it sets up a really good series. We talked to Travis Demers yesterday about how excited he is for the Knicks, and I get that, and I think the Knicks have a really good chance with their, just the way they play, the defense, the fact that they don't have the biggest rotation, but their rotation might be some of the best of the teams left as far as just, depth from top to bottom. But then again, I really like the Pacers. Rick Carlisle, awesome story. It's great to see Tyrese Halliburton, and kind of a pass first point guard have success. I mean, a couple years or whenever that trade was when they acquired Pascal Siakam, either a deadline or 2 deadlines ago, nobody really pegged the Pacers to be the contenders there. They ended up getting Siakam. He's been a guy that's come in and has that championship experience. So I really wouldn't count out the Pacers. I'm sure there's a lot of money on the Knicks in this series, and the Knicks are favorited. I get that. But I think the Pacers and Rick Carlisle might be able to give them a game. So we'll see ultimately how that game shakes out. And again, that starts at 5 o'clock on TNT and Max, and we will bring you guys updates as that game goes along. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and look back at just a couple things from back last hour, and that is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander named the NBA's MVP again. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, an incredible season this year for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Obviously leads them to the 1 seed and averages 32.7 points per game, 6.4 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. He shoots 52% from the floor and nearly 38% from beyond the arc. Gotta love that, right? I mean, it's not like he's had a ton of, postseason experience. Obviously had some games with the Thunder last year and then back in 2020. But this is a guy who, was traded from the Clippers after that first year where he played in the playoffs and they took the Warriors to 6 games. He was kind of the golden goose, so to speak, that the Thunder were like, we're going to rebuild around you. We're going to build as you build and start getting their draft picks. And, you think back to it amazes me that this guy fell in the 2018 draft. It just proves you don't know, right? So the Portland Trailblazers, folks, they're picking 11 this year. You know where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was picked? 11. So it entirely proves you can still, it's harder. Don't get me wrong, very harder. But it is entirely possible to still find now an MVP level candidate in the teens, right? We talked about Kawhi Leonard. We talked about Jalen Williams. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I'm going to read you the players who went in front of him before we break here and get to Carter Baines here in just a little bit. DeAndre Ayton, Portland Trailblazer, goes 1 in that draft. Marvin Bagley goes 2. Luka goes 3. Jaren Jackson 4. Trae Young 5. Other than Marvin Bagley, I think there's some good things in that group. Then you start to trickle off a little bit. You got Mo Bamba at 6, didn't quite meet the expectations. Wendell Carter, plays for the Magic, still a solid player. Colin Sexton, now for the Jazz. Kevin Knox had a stint in Portland as well, didn't quite work out. McCall Bridges, great player. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 11. So you never know, right? You can always find a player. You just never know how a draft shakes out, what teams' needs are in front of you if they pass on a guy. So there should be something to be said for that. All right, well, we got the Rip City Drive here with Brendan Slaughter. When we come back, we're going to be catching up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports. Excited to get Carter's thoughts on a bunch of different topics. Again, talking some Beaver baseball, talking some football, talking about his new role with CBS Sports, all that and more here on the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Pleased to welcome on our next guest, a good friend of mine, a fellow Sherwoodian and an Oregon State alum, and a sports writer for CBS Sports. Carter Baines on the show. What's going on, Carter? How you been, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Brendan. Good to hear your voice again.
Absolutely, man. Life is good. Staying busy, hosting Rip City Drive for Chad this week. And as soon as I found out, I'm like, I got to catch up with Carter, man. We can talk Beavs. We can talk Blazers. Definitely miss seeing you, man. How have things been in your world?
Things are crazy. Just getting started at CBS Sports this week, moving over from 24/7 Sports, where I've been for, the better part of 7 years.
Congratulations again, man.
And then moving over to, thanks. It's exciting moving over to the national news desk over there at CBS after doing the same at 24/7. So pretty fired up to get started. And it's the next step, man. Next step after all those years we put in together down in Corvallis.
Oh yeah, I mean, man, we got some good memories together when we were the best of frenemies, as I love to say. And I was thinking just the other day when last week, Carter, when the NBA lottery was going on, I was down in Vegas, and I was down poolside in Vegas watching the lottery, and I couldn't help think. When we were down there for the Las Vegas Bowl in 2022, when me, you, and Trevor Denton went out and went gambling on the town, and it was a good time, man. We had some good times at the bowl games.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we didn't get to rekindle those memories down there the last couple of years, but man, the vibe around Oregon State, I can feel it shifting a little bit, and it seems like things are moving back in a positive direction. And obviously, I've been a little bit removed the last couple of years, not being on the beat. But it's exciting to see things move back in that positive direction after obviously the hiccup when Smith left and the transfer portal ravaged the program and frankly ravaged the entire athletic department.
I mean, he said you couldn't have summed it up. I mean, it was a dark cloud, man. I mean, let's not all forget, I think Jonathan Smith leaving is putting it kindly, Carter.
Yeah.
I think I would have chosen a different adjective, but no, I mean, all jokes. I mean, that was tough. Losing the team was tough. And, obviously the way that I look at it now and, just as coming into this football season is, there were times, Carter, and I think you'll agree with me on this, when the Beavers were objectively a bad football team last season. I say see Air Force, see Cal, right? But even in a bad kind of ish season, they still won 5 games. They still had a pretty impressive win over Washington State late in the year. That tells me that even in, quote, a down year, you're still only one way a win from, being in postseason. That tells me I don't think we're going to have another kind of struggle season coming up for Oregon State this next year.
Yeah, I was going to point to that Wazoo game, and I'm glad you brought it up because I think that's the kind of game that proves to you that they've still got it.
Right.
They still have that. I don't even want to necessarily call it a ceiling because I don't think that has to be the ceiling for next year's team. I think the expectation can be that you go in and beat Wazoo with the talent they brought in and retained. But I think that kind of game was important because it stopped the snowball. Mm-hmm. It stopped those games, like you mentioned, the Air Force type performances, the Cal type performances, where frankly nothing went right on either side of the ball, and particularly defensively, just letting those teams move the ball at ease, even though they weren't particularly elite teams. To be able to bounce back from that and have that kind of game against Washington State where you look like the Oregon State of old, you look like the Jonathan Smith era team that's going to go punch you in the mouth and then beat you on a play action. I think that's the identity that Trent Bray still wants to have. I think that's the identity they showed in that game. And I think you'll see more of that Oregon State team this year once things, there's a little more stability, it seems like, from the outside looking in at least. And I think they can get back to that level that they got away from for a couple of games in a season that had its ups and downs.
We're catching up with Carter Baines from CBS Sports. Appreciate your time, Carter. And just a couple more things to zero in on that. And you're obviously kind of have more of the macro view than someone like myself who is kind of still in the micro view of Oregon State. And it is really positive to hear from you that the Oregon State kind of image is kind of in a better place than it was. And, largely, I think there's several factors as to why. I think it's, like always, I think it's very helpful that right now, Oregon State baseball is going to be a pretty big factor in the postseason. They're, been a top 10 team pretty much all year. So that helps. I think the women's basketball team reaching the tournament and making the run at the NCAAs when they were not expected to do that helped. And then on the football side, Carter, I know it's really cliche just to say a quarterback, but Malik Murphy kind of had a gravitas effect. And there are some people who are definitely excited to see what Malik can do in Corvallis. So I think all those things combined have definitely been positives for the athletic department as a whole as of recent.
Sure, and I'll throw in, even men's basketball wasn't a no-name.
Right,
this is a team that beat Gonzaga on national TV on a weeknight, and then, they make it to the college basketball crown in the inaugural year. So it's not like the men's basketball program wasn't necessarily pulling its weight either. But to your point about Malik Murphy, I think this is where Oregon State can hang its hat as it moves into the 2025 season as being more than just a regional brand, more than just nobody outside of the Pac-2 sphere is following them. I think Malik Murphy has the chance to kind of transcend the Pac-2 sphere and be a national name again. Because, let's not forget, this is a former Texas signee, was in the same quarterback room as Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, goes to Duke. He's a record setter at Duke. And then at 24/7 Sports, we had him as a top 10 quarterback in the portal, 4-star guy, comes over to Oregon State, makes a splash. He's the kind of guy that I think if he plays well, and I think he will because he's got a good receiving core coming back, he can elevate Oregon State's image on the national stage and get people talking about the Beavers. And I think if he is the catalyst, if he is the reason they're winning games, if the offense is really good, people are going to take notice. And Oregon State's got a chance to be a fun story.
No, I completely agree on all fronts. And the thing that impressed me the most, Carter, is Oregon State fans, or, in this case, boosters. I like to call, a spade as far as what things are and the reality. And the reality is now, if you want to be a factor in college football, you have to pay for a quarterback. That's just where we are in the game now, unless you were a very unique situation. And, no different than we know that, DJU was taken care of a couple years ago. We know that last year the Beavers brought in Giovanni McCoy. And then this year, move and transition to Malik Murphy. And, Carter, based on the numbers that have been thrown out there, it sounds like Oregon State fans, or particularly a few boosters, really opened up their pockets because, I think Malik Murphy does love the fit, with Oregon State and the coaching staff. And he's just a tremendous kid, getting to know him this spring at spring football and all those things. But at the same token, Carter, there's maybe a million or so reasons why he might be here.
Yeah, that's just the reality in college football now. Look at his replacement at Duke. They handpicked the guy that they wanted over him, and they're going to pay Darian Mensah $4 million a year for someone who's never played in Power 5, or in Power 4. It's absurd.
Right. From what I heard, it was because they wanted a more mobile offense than what Malik Murphy provided. Yeah.
Yeah, and Oregon State doesn't need the Darian Mensah type that's going to come in and run for 100 yards a game. That's not Oregon State's offense. That's not the style they want to play with. And Malik Murphy, to his credit, found a system that I think is going to utilize him really well. And I know there was some frustration in the Duke fan base with his decision making at times, and I think a lot of that comes back to, look at what happened with DJU. If you're in the wrong system, you're in the wrong system. And I think that's where Murphy can shine at Oregon State. Yeah, he's not going to make the $4 million that his replacement's making at Duke, but he'll make a nice chunk of change to potentially play even better in Corvallis. Who wouldn't sign up for that? Right.
No, and I think, you talk about Malik Murphy, and he was pretty blunt with us in spring, Carter. He's like, really wasn't my decision to leave. It so happened. And, I think there's some potential, and I think the DJU comparisons is just natural, considering that's kind of, they're both pretty high-level recruits and all these things. I will say this, though, as far as a positive, I think Murphy has a bigger runway than DJU has, and DJU kind of left Clemson after, kind of getting passed in the order by Cade Klubnik and kind of knew that there wasn't a spot for him. Murphy is coming off, his best season as a quarterback, and there's still room for him to grow, I think, considering he didn't play an awful lot at Texas. I really think, this is a home run for Trent Bray and co. We'll have to see how it plays out, of course, but man, I like it.
It's true, and he's got eligibility too. I mean, you got to remember he could be here for 2 years in Corvallis if he wants it. And I'm not saying he's an NFL prospect next year, but if he plays the lights out and he gets some looks, he's going to have a decision to make. But man, if he comes back to Corvallis for a second season and they're able to rebuild a roster around him, use him as a selling point in the portal and on the recruiting trail, man, maybe you look at 26 as being a special year. I don't know. It's hard not to be excited about the possibility because Oregon State hasn't had this caliber, this name of a quarterback too often over the last handful of years. Obviously DJ was kind of the guy as far as the Jonathan Smith era goes as having a big name quarterback. And now Trent's got his first big name quarterback, and it'll be interesting to see what he can build around it.
Absolutely. And to that point, I mean, it's interesting because I think DJU was one of their better quarterbacks we've seen in the Smith era, obviously. But you look at the numbers, it still wasn't like world-beating numbers, Carter. He didn't throw for 3,000 yards, right? Like solid, but not like crazy, like, oh my gosh, that was an amazing single year. So I've sometimes gone back further and been like, I don't know if Oregon State's had a true vertical passer as good as Malik Murphy since probably Jake Luton.
Yeah, I think you'd have to go back that far. And then obviously Sean Mannion after that or before that. He does kind of fit that mold, though, right? Like he's got this cannon of an arm. And I think is a little more reliable with it than DJ was. Similar passers in that they can hit the giant deep ball, but then, might struggle a little bit over the middle of the field, those 15-yard routes. So I think you'll see a similar play style between Murphy and DJU in that sense.
Catching up with Carter Baines, CBS sports writer here on the Rip City Drive. Carter, appreciate your time. Let's switch some gears because I know you, like me, love not only Oregon State baseball, but love postseason baseball, man. I know you got to be getting excited for, what Oregon State's going to be doing this postseason. Obviously, they finished their regular season. They are now in waiting mode until selection Monday. And, the big question now is, obviously, can they still get into that top 8 national seed mix? Just from what you've been able to follow this year, do you think that they're still in consideration, or you think they're maybe on the outside looking in?
Well, predicting what the NCAA is going to do is always a fool's errand, right?
It's fun, right?
they'll give you one set of criteria one year, and then the next year they'll do the opposite thing. So here's what I'll say. If they go strictly based off RPI, I think it's hard to argue against Oregon State as a top 8 national seed. They're 6th in the RPI now. They're not playing a conference tournament, so obviously there's going to be some movement there if some of those SEC teams and UNC and Clemson from the ACC move around a little bit in their conference tournaments. But, I mean, Oregon State's done its part, right? Like, this is a top 10 RPI team that has played more road games than any other team in the top 10 of the RPI. Like, you can't really ask for them to do much more. The record in quad 1 and quad 2 games, I think, will be the thing that holds them back if there is something that holds them out of the top 8 seed. I think the committee will be quick to point out the 4-game sweep to Oregon as much as the Beavers and their fans are ready to move on from that.
I agree.
That is the kind of result that when you are, let's say, in a coin flip scenario with a Clemson or a North Carolina, that's the kind of thing that can lose you the coin flip.
Right.
And I could see that costing them.
It's a fair observation, Carter, because not too long ago I was watching the D1 baseball, Kendall Rogers and Aaron Fitt. I love what those guys do at D1, and their coverage is outstanding. And they were talking about Oregon State, and it was so crazy the margins, Carter, because again these D1 guys obviously don't sit on the committee, all those things they speculate, they put out their projections, but I think it was Aaron Fitt who was like, man, if Oregon State just could have went 2 of 4 with Oregon, even if they could have gotten the Tuesday game, he mentioned, he's like, we'd maybe be looking at this different. He's like, 4-0 is just kind of a ugly looking number.
Yeah, and one other point I'll make too, if you look at non-conference games in particular, You take out all of these SEC teams racking up wins against each other, and
Right.
I kind of liken it to groupthink, where you put all of these SEC teams together and you're just comparing them against each other, and if you tell them they're really good, then they're going to believe it. So when you look at the non-conference RPI, Oregon State's number 3. And I think that's a little more telling because we know that these SEC teams are in the big tournaments that Oregon State was in. The Beavers played against Oklahoma. They played against Auburn. They've got the 3rd best RPI when you take out everyone else's conference games. And
Interesting.
when you look at it through the lens of Oregon State's an independent and isn't playing a conference schedule, all right, well, let's compare the Beavers to teams without their conference schedules. And Oregon State, by that measurement, is a top 3 team in the country. And I think that is a really, really strong argument that the committee should take into account because it's not very often, and in fact, basically never, that you've got an independent program in this type of conversation. And so, how do you not ding them for not playing a conference schedule? I think you look at those non-conference games, and Oregon State, man, they were right up there with the best of them.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting to see. Like you said, predicting the committee is something. I did see a note this week that got passed along to me, Carter, that someone from the University of Portland is on the NCAA baseball committee. So you never know, right, as far as, having some West Coast representation in the committee. But I had to ask you about this, too, because I think if Oregon State is not a national seed, not a top 8, let's just say for the sake of argument in this particular spot, they're not. If they're not, and you know as well as I, having followed the team for a long time, that typically speaking, Oregon State, if in these years where they're not a national seed, they can still take care of business and win at home in their regional. But when they have to go down to the deep south and play in humidity, play in these, these 10,000 seat stadiums, the job becomes tougher. And we haven't seen Oregon State make Omaha in their, recent history without having those supers be at Goss. That being said, I think that, like you said, if the committee decides that 0-4 loss to Oregon is detrimental, I think a pretty good consolation prize would be what the latest D1 projection was, Carter, and that was Oregon as the number 8 national seed matched up with Oregon State as the 9 seed. Could you imagine super regionals with a shot to Omaha on the line at PK and revenge for Oregon State at hand? Ooh, man, that would be a weekend of baseball.
What would be the orange and green split in the stands? Because in years past, Oregon State fans have invaded that place, but that wasn't the case in the regular season this year. So I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, just for the baseball fans in the state, Carter, obviously, where my loyalties would lie, but I would love to see that matchup because, you put these two teams, I think that would be best for Oregon State because it's okay, if you're not going to be top 8, if the worst place you have to go on the road for the Supers is 40 miles south, that seems mighty ideal to me than rather having to go to Auburn, Georgia, Vanderbilt, any of these places where it's really tough to go beat them. And I'm not saying it's not for Oregon, too, but I think it's more even footing. Do you agree?
Yeah, this is true. Oregon State, you look at the splits, their home road splits are pretty stark, 17-2 at home, and they've got 10 losses on the road. It's clear that this team plays better at Goss. That has always been the case. They are one of the best home teams in college baseball because the atmosphere is just so electric. And it's very apparent every postseason. And to have to go down to SEC country, I think when you look at where Oregon State has struggled, that sweep against Oregon, that was on the road in an environment that was uncharacteristically pro-Oregon. They go over to Hawaii and they lose a game on the islands. Some of their losses to better teams came in neutral site games. Oregon State just hasn't been reliable away from home. And I think when you put it in an extreme environment, say they have to go down to Baton Rouge,
right,
or I'm looking at teams in that kind of that 7-12 range. Let's say Clemson gets on the right side of the national seed line and they have to go to Clemson. These are significantly tougher environments than you'd be playing if you were in a West Coast super regional.
Oh, yeah. And I've said this for a couple days now, Carter. I know it sounds trivial because I think it's a lot like kind of saying, oh, if you go play the Denver Nuggets or the Colorado Buffaloes, you have to deal with, altitude. And a lot of coaches and things downplay it. And I get where you're like, where, someone could be like, well, Brendan, it's just weather. But I think when you're playing baseball, which is, a outside sport, and you're used to playing it in the Pacific Northwest where you are not going to get one iota of humidity, you go down, like you said, Carter, play Baton Rouge, first week of June. I mean, we all know what that kind of weather is going to be like. You're going to step outside and your shirt's going to be soaked.
And not just the weather, but I mean, look at the stadiums Oregon State plays in on the West Coast. Even during the Pac-12 era, how often were the Beavers playing in front of more than 4,000 fans?
Very rare. And you go down to the box.
Rarely.
Right. You go down to the box, that's 10,000 fans plus.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, 4,000 is bottom of the barrel in the SEC. So it's not just the weather. You're not playing on artificial turf anymore in most of those stadiums. You're playing in front of probably 2 to 3 times as many fans who are going against you rather than behind you. Because, at Oregon State, the largest crowds you're playing in front of, they're in your corner. All of that makes it significantly more difficult than playing at home. And I think it is one of the starker contrasts for any program at this caliber that Oregon State is in a very unique boat that SEC teams and the Big 12 teams and the ACC teams just can't relate to because they play in that environment already, and Oregon State just doesn't.
Right. No, it's entirely unique to Oregon State and their situation. And, just last thing for you, Carter, before we run out of time here. Appreciate your time here on the Rip City Drive. You, like me, obviously born and raised here and have a care for the Trailblazers as well. I'm got to hear right off the bat what your reaction was to the team being put up for sale. Is the Baines & Associate Investment Group gathering their funds? Are we going to make a bid?
Yeah, all $3.5 billion of it, right?
I'm hearing it might even be 4 to 5, Carter, so you might need a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, if 3.5 is the valuation, obviously the sale price is going to be larger. I don't know that I can scratch up that much, but man, if someone wants to go in on it with me, sure, I'll be a co-owner. I mean, I'll probably care about the team more than the previous or current ownership. So.
Yeah, like I said, I had to get your thoughts just because, it's obviously big news, and it was big news when it came down, and I'm very curious to see over the next year what names kind of pop up, and who knows, right? Well, that's the beauty of it. There's only so many billionaires in the world, so it's going to be interesting to see what names ultimately come up. Carter, I'll let you go, my friend. I appreciate the time. It was great catching up, and we're going to have to do something this summer, man. Appreciate coming on the show, and it was great catching up, boss.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Carter Baines from CBS Sports. Again, known Carter for quite some time. Went to Sherwood, went to Oregon State together, and he's just one of the best people you'll ever meet, man. He is just a good dude, and I appreciate him joining me on the show today. Talking a lot of Beavers, man. That's a lot of optimism that I hear for the Beavs, man, coming into this next season. Pretty good stuff. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. We'll recap the conversation with Carter, get you guys ready for hour number 3 here on a Wednesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday so far. Big shout out to our guests so far, Dan Pizzuta in hour number 1, and just got done talking to Carter Baines, good friend of mine, fellow Sherwoodian, fellow Oregon State alum. We talked about a little bit of everything, man. It's great to hear the optimism on a national scale for Oregon State returning. You know, it was a dark, time after, Jonathan Smith left. They were left in a conference that didn't have anything. And, you can see they're coming out the other side. Things are getting more positive. And like Carter said, Oregon State athletics has been pretty solid. I mean, I get the men's team didn't make the big dance or the NIT, but they were better than what we'd seen. Baseball team is going to make a charge at Omaha this year. Women's team, Scott Ruick's girls, they they squeezed blood out of a diamond this year. I mean, it was impressive what they did. And, now we just have to see what football can do, right? I mean, obviously football had, a tiny iota of momentum from that Washington State game, but they've, there were a lot of fans that were real frustrated with, some of those more lopsided games we mentioned last year. So a lot to dive into with Oregon State, and I'm as much as anybody, I'm stoked for the start of football season. I'm really excited for, fall camp to come right around the corner. And, as I was talking about with Carter, I think Malik Murphy has really elevated Oregon State's profile. He mentioned he's got a possibility to, really be able to transcend the Pac-2, and I think that's possible. I mean, I'm not saying, Malik Murphy is, Drew Aller or any of these, tier 1, Heisman Trophy shortlist quarterbacks, but I think this is a guy who's going to surprise some people in the sense that I think he's a better fit than DJU was for Oregon State. I think he is a little bit more just singularly focused on winning. Like, that was one of the big differences. Like Carter said, skill set wise, DJU and Malik Murphy, kind of similar players. DJ's a little taller. He can run a little bit more and can throw the ball really far too. And, Malik, same thing. Both of them maybe need to improve their touch just a little bit. But the difference that I noticed between the two of them, Malik Murphy kind of has that, just gritty mentality of do whatever it takes to win. And I'm not saying DJ didn't have that, but Malik Murphy, like when we started talking to him, like some of the first things he ever said is, I'm here to win. I'm here to win. And that is just, it's underrated in today's, brand of college football because, you have guys chasing the bag or chasing this and, just want to start or whatever. And, to find those guys that really have the, the bulldog, kind of eat your face off mentality to be a starting quarterback and want to win, those are the Michael Penix Juniors. Those are the Bo Nixes, those players who just, they hate to lose more than they like to win. And there is a distinction. So, it's one of those things. Very excited for the start of Oregon State football, and also great baseball conversation with Carter too. He had some awesome advanced metrics on, the quads and all those things. I still think that Oregon State's best case is probably going to be being the 9 seed matched up with Oregon. I just don't know if they've done enough to be in the top 8. But like Carter said, they go off RPI. They've got a pretty good case. All right, coming up, hour number 3, final hour of the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. We got Ron Callan coming up in hour number 3. Excited to talk to Ron, talk some more Beaver baseball, also some Oregon State women's basketball as well with Ron. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been named the league's MVP after averaging 32.7 points, 6 assists, and 5 boards per game, leading the Oklahoma City Thunder this season. The Thunder cruised past the Minnesota Timberwolves 114-88 in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals last night. Shai led the way for the Thunder with 31 points and 9 assists. The Pacers and Knicks get underway momentarily just past the top of the hour. TNT and Max is where you can find that game tonight. And in a surprising twist, the tush push isn't banned as in the NFL as it survives by 2 votes. Coming up on the big show, we'll be catching up with Ron Callan from Oregon State Radio, talking baseball. He was on the call for Mike Parker this last weekend. Also, get his thoughts on some women's basketball. The Beavers have been played a really great season. Want to get his thoughts on a couple things entering next year. You've got the Rip City Drive on a Wednesday with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive, final hour here on a Wednesday. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Big shout out to our guests so far today. Caught up with Dan Pizzuta in the first hour, talked everything NFL. Loved his reaction to the Seahawks, talking about how they kind of took an intriguing flyer with Jalen Milroe and, just the Sam Darnold situation. And it's exciting, right? They definitely have some irons in the fire up there, and also talking about the tush push and just overall, kind of some of the bigger surprising stories across the NFL. And then last hour, catching up with Carter Baines. It was great to catch up with Carter. Good friend of mine. Carter is now with CBS Sports and doing great work for them. And, he, like me, is big time Oregon State supporter. And, I enjoyed our conversation just talking about how the sun has kind of started to shine on Oregon State once again. It was a tough time there for a while, especially after the conference fell apart. Head coach decided that living in Michigan and making a few more bucks was worth ripping apart all his connections in Corvallis. Hey, each to their own, right? But nevertheless, it was a tough stretch for Oregon State, and I think it's positive to hear that we're hearing, not only on the local, micro level, but on the national macro level, we're starting to see, more people pay attention to Oregon State, which is, a very, very good thing as we get closer and closer to the rebuilt Pac-12. Oregon State and Washington State and the other new members are still going to be looking for one more member to make the conference whole as far as having enough football members, but lots of positive things going on right now. And, of course, the most present is Oregon State baseball. And we've talked about that at length this week, just about the back and forth. And like I said before, I think it would be killer for the state and just for both fan bases to have an Oregon State-Oregon super regional with a shot at Omaha on the line. I mean, that would just be fantastic. Inject that into my veins over and over again. That would just be a fantastic couple days. And like Carter was saying, I'd like to see, can the Ducks hold serve at home? Should they be hosting? Will Oregon State fans try to invade a little bit? So lots of great things there, and definitely appreciate that conversation with Carter as well. Let's go ahead and circle back a little NBA action. Let's talk a little bit more about the Timberwolves and the Thunder. Again, played a couple clips in the first hour, but want to circle back. Anthony Edwards was pretty blunt after the loss to the Thunder. Again, they led at halftime. Thunder had a big-time second half and ended up running away with that game. Anthony Edwards, he turned an ankle, turned out to be okay, but he kind of talked about what he's got to do more to get the Timberwolves back in the series.
I definitely got to shoot more. I only took 13 shots, but I'll say probably just get off the ball a little more, play without the ball. I think that'll be the answer because playing on the ball, they just gonna double and sit in the gaps all day. So, got to go watch some film and pick it apart. We'll figure it out.
You heard it there yourself. Only 13 bleeping shots. So for a shooting guard, I think Anthony Edwards knows he probably needs to hoist up about 20, 25 a game. He needs to be efficient with those shots. There's just not a lot of room for error against a great team like the Thunder that are deep, can burn you in a lot of different ways. And not to say the Timberwolves aren't either, but I think they're definitely kind of the underdog going for the big upset. And the Thunder, definitely it's their job to hold serve, and it's Timberwolves' job to continue to upset teams just like they took down the Warriors. But I would go back, the Warriors took game one of that series, and then, Minnesota kind of obviously took over. I think a lot of that was definitely Steph Curry's injury, don't get me wrong. But, Anthony Edwards is that kind of guy. And, I love that clip, right? His confidence. Like, that's one of the things that Edwards has just been second to none since he came into the league. Like, his confidence, like the swagger, being able to truly believe that when he steps into an arena, he is the best player there. I mean, I kid you not, folks. Like, if he could get in a time machine and you put Anthony Edwards in a gym with, like, fresh off the Last Dance Michael Jordan, Anthony Edwards would sit there and go, oh, yeah, I could beat that guy. Like, that's just his supreme confidence. And if you don't have the game to back it up, yes, it looks really tacky. It's not there. Anthony Edwards is kind of proven, again, you've heard the Kobe comparisons. I see it. It's kind of aft as far as the game. Like, he kind of has the game to back up his supreme level of confidence. And I love seeing that. I really do. But let's go ahead and continue on this. I want to hear a little bit more from Chris Finch, Timberwolves head coach. In that game, they, like I said, they were up at halftime. And then Chris Finch kind of felt that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was able to get the friendly benefit of some calls there in that second half.
Coach, could you sense some of the frustrations that some of your players had with some of the calls that Shai was able to draw?
Yeah, there was a lot of frustration out there, but we talked about that before the series started, and we have to be able to kind of put that aside and get on with the next play mentality. So.
And again, I think the key takeaway here for the Timberwolves is, they've been in this situation before. They led at halftime, and this was Mark Daigneault, Thunder head coach, talking about how they were down, right, and had to play much better ball in the second half.
I thought that was the game, for us, to play as poorly as we did offensively in the first half and to be down 4 was a major victory for us at halftime. And the defense was a huge catalyst in that.
And again, that's what the Thunder do. We talked about that with Keith Smith this week, Travis Demers. Like, the Thunder just fly around on defense. They may not have like an imposing, Donovan Clingan, Zach Edey, DeAndre Ayton type player who's just going to be a menace, like down low for size and strength and all that. But man, they defend well. They fly around well. They've got so many guys who have length, and I think. It's still it's amazing to me that they have one of the younger rosters in the NBA. Like, they are going to be a problem for years to come when you're like, oh, the oldest guy they have is Alex Caruso. And you're like, even Alex Caruso is only 31 years old. So this team is set up so well for the future. I did see an interesting comment on X, when I heard about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, he's got a decision coming up. He will need to wait a year to be eligible for his 5-year extension, but can sign a 4-year extension coming up. And I was kind of getting into the nitty gritty of, those numbers. And it looks like, Shai could be a player who makes, 70 plus. And, potentially if he waits, could be a player who makes, even more on a per year basis. He could be the first guy we see push towards almost $80 million a year. But the thing that's kind of interesting with him or with that situation is one of the top replies I saw on X was, well, the downturn has already started. Adam Silver's new second apron is undefeated. And I think it's an interesting kind of like, of course, it was in a joking sense and like, haha's comment on X, but in a real sense, folks, it's true. The way this new CBA is set up, and part of the reason, we've seen the Thunder be able to build a good rosters. They haven't had, guys on supermaxes. When you start getting several players on supermaxes, right? I'm thinking like Boston, right? Eventually Boston's going to be limited with the amount of, flexibility that they'll have, right? That's why you're going to see a team like the San Antonio Spurs do whatever they can to push the chips in now because you're getting Victor Wembanyama and Stephon Castle on these rookie deals. Like you see, like that's why you're going to see the Spurs really try to compete these next 2 years because I believe it's next year. Wemby and Stephon Castle combined make like $25 million. It's very much like what the Seattle Seahawks were able to do with Russell Wilson early on in his career all these many years ago. When you can get a player on a rookie deal who can be, or even the second deal, right? But sometimes a player like, for example, like I'm very curious to see where Shaden Sharp's next deal goes, right? Because Shaden Sharp is not going to be a max player. He's not going to be, but wherever that middling range is going to be determined on how they, how much flexibility they have to build their team moving forward. So that's always kind of the very interesting thing with me. I mean, you go back even further. Steph Curry early in his career when he had the ankle injuries, that's why the Warriors were able to get him for his second contract on a relatively good pact. I mean, speaking just off the top of my head here, but I think it was something like 4 years, $44 million or something like that. And that overlapped during, I want to say their first championship, maybe their second too. But I know that flexibility is what allowed them, to ultimately, make the moves to get Kevin Durant. So, it's kind of interesting how, contracts and exactly how much you pay somebody, can have an impact down the line. So I think the Thunder are going to be threading the needle because, you have to pay Shea. You're going to have to pay Chet. You're going to have to pay Jalen Williams. There's three guys who in their own rights are probably going to feel they command a max salary. After that, then you have limited options to build the rest of your team. So I really think this new CBA, like whether or not it sticks around, and that'll be interesting as if it sticks around long term. But at least now it looks like it's going to cause some teams to have to make some calculated adjustments. You think about the Nuggets after they won championship a couple years ago, they're still chasing it because they said KCP, Bruce Brown, we're not going to deal with this second apron. So it's definitely interesting, and I'm very curious to see ultimately what's going to happen with the Oklahoma City Thunder. But hey, that's why you have to win championships when you have the opportunity. Nothing is guaranteed, even if you've got guys under contract for 4 or 5 years. You have to take advantage of your window when they're open because you never know. Our team, like you would have thought going in this year, Celtics have the window to go back to back. One injury, boom. Then all of a sudden they're out. Same with the Warriors. You're like, hey, could the Warriors possibly push, maybe try to get ring number 5? Nah, nope. One Steph Curry injury and they were donezo. So I think injuries matter a lot in the NBA, and same thing for the Cavs. So you have to take advantage, and nothing in the future, despite the Thunder having all these great picks and all this young talent, there's no guarantee that you just go, their runway is for the next 10 years because you never know what's going to happen with, how much guys make, how much you have to move things around. So we'll see how all that shakes out. Coming up, we got Ron Callan joining us here on the Rip City Drive. Going to be talking some Beaver baseball, some Oregon State women's basketball. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. We're back here on the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Happy to welcome on our next guest, one of the voices of Oregon State athletics, Ron Callan, on the program. Ron, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Brendan, good to hear your voice. Thanks for having me. And wow, lots going on. This is the most bizarre week maybe in the history of Oregon State baseball. Everybody's at conference tournaments, and they're hanging out,
I know.
waiting to see what's going to happen. It's really weird.
Oh, it's so weird. And, it's great to hear from you too, Ron. You and I have known each other for, probably 10 plus years now. And, when I found out I was hosting, the show for a couple days, I was like, there were a couple people that were on the short list that I wanted to talk to, and you were definitely one of them because we've been through it all, Ron. We've been through quite a bit of stuff together.
Believe me, you're right, and in all of the different aspects of it too. I mean, I was called in. I've been doing football and women's basketball now 17 years, going on my 18th, and then, I had done like 6 baseball games in 2009 for Mike Parker, and then Mike says, "Hey, I got to have hip replacement. Can you do the last 4 games?" And so I had a blast last week. It was so much fun. The Beavers won all 4. So when you fill in as a broadcaster, you don't want to be 0-4. You want to be 4-0. So I was lucky on that. But, this is a good young team. They've got some really good arms, young arms. I can't wait to see what the committee will do to Oregon State. If you look at the RPI this morning, they're number 6 still. But in the top 5 spots, SEC, 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 and SEC. I mean, so where will they wind up? And they deserve to host the first round for sure. I think the Super Regional is a dice roll. It's going to depend on that committee.
Absolutely. And again, catching up with Ron Callan here on the Rip City Drive. And, Ron, to that point, you obviously, I remember, getting a chance to meet you early in my career too. And I've caught up with a couple people this week. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is, I remember when you and I got a chance to meet when I was just, a wide-eyed freshman, man. And one of the things I stand out is, you were one of those people who, didn't treat Brendan like the kid that he was. And I'll always remember that, man. That was something really special to me.
Well, hey, you can tell when somebody really has a passion for something, and you definitely have a passion for broadcasting and writing, and of course you care about the Beavers too. So put that all together, and hey, look where you are now. You're doing a primetime show on 620.
Oh yeah,
which is one of the most powerful signals.
Oh yeah, it's been a journey, man, and I absolutely love it. And I want to get your thoughts. You mentioned the Long Beach State game, and obviously wishing Mike Doc Parker all the best in his recovery. Hope to hear Mike back soon. But you obviously filled in for Long Beach State this last weekend. I can't remember which game it was, but there was at least one game, Ron, where it was over 4,000 for the crowd there at Goss Stadium. Just what was the environment like for those couple days there at Goss?
Well, those last 2 games, 41-08, then 41-13.
Got you.
Those are the 3rd and 4th largest regular season crowds ever for the Beavers. So that was exciting. The fans are so hungry, and they care so much. I mean, it's amazing. And that the game on Friday night, I mean, the Beavers are up 8-0, then all of a sudden it's 8-5, then it's 12-5, then it's 12-8, but they hung on and won it. So then on Saturday, I mean, Long Beach State had to get out of town to get a plane, but after it was 13-0.
Right.
I mean, but the fans, it was a festive atmosphere, and now they've got such great players. I mean, Cannon Reeder had one of the great games in the history of Oregon State baseball with 7 ribbies against the Dirtbags. And there are so many more. Iva Arquette, Wilson Weber's had a tremendous late April and May. They're both been nominated for big awards today. And so I just think these young pitchers, Ethan Kleinschmidt and Dax Whitney, they both had 1-hitters through 5, against Long Beach State. So I can't wait to see who they will host, because they will. There's no doubt they're going to host the first round, probably beginning on, Monday's the 26th at 9 a.m. for the show. So May the 30th probably will be the first game of the regional.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ron. I think, at this point with the RPI and their schedule, they're locked in as a top 16 host. The question is, have they done enough to get into the top 8? And I've talked with a great many people this week, probably over talking about it, but that's the fun thing to do when you're idle, right? In Oregon State, I think back to the media interviews the Beavers gave today. It was great to hear that they had some downtime, Ron, It brought a great smile to my face to hear that, I think it was Wilson Weber went out and went fishing. Like it sounds like they really just kind of got down away from baseball for a couple days, are now getting into the postseason swing. But I think they're going to be very well rested going into the postseason. That could be a benefit.
Wilson Weber is a great catcher. He can hit the long ball. And he's one heck of a fisherman, along with Trent Carraway, man. Those guys know how to go out there and bring in the big one, right?
That's awesome.
So that's pretty cool. And, I love the way Mitch Canham handles this team. I think he's become such a great manager, coach, whatever you want to call it in the college game. But he is just so – when they had kind of a controversial play, I believe it was Friday night, Carraway gets called out at home plate. Now, the catcher for Long Beach State looked like he interfered, and Carraway didn't try to slide. So they said because he didn't try to slide, there was no interference. So what did Mitch do? He spent like an hour on that rule, went over the play, that he had videos of that play and other plays to show the players, look, if you're in the on-deck box, you got to make sure you let the guy who's rounding third, should he slide or not. So, he just wants to get these kids better, get their baseball IQ up to the max. And, this is an exciting time, and Beaver Nation is just, apoplectic over how great they love this team.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think this is a cool time.
Oh, absolutely. And, like I've said for others, Oregon State really, Ron, you could transplant Oregon State's baseball team and have them be in the Deep South in one of those 10,000 seat stadiums. Mm-hmm. Oregon State would fit right in with their program in the SEC as far as, that just a rabid hunger fan base for good baseball. And I think that's why you see fans hold the Beavers to a high standard, right? We've seen 3 national championships since, 2006. And, right. It's one of those things that to Oregon State is very unique. Like other programs have success, but they've got the hardware, Ron.
They do, and they have faced some adversity this season. Think about the women's basketball team, the men's basketball team, and baseball have been on so many road trips. The WCC schedule for the hoops was just weird. Compared to the old Pac-12,
sure.
And everything was so uniform. And now with baseball, how many trips have they been on?
A lot.
But they were so happy to be home for 4 games in a row. Of course, last Tuesday against the Pilots, and then Long Beach State for 3. So I think they'll be ready, and it'll be just fascinating to see where the committee who they send out to the Pacific time zone, because it looks like there'll be four teams in Eugene and 4 in Corvallis.
Absolutely. And, along those same lines, Ron, it's a exercise that's fun for us to talk about. But I think even say you, put any of these teams above Oregon State, I think this is one of the things working in their favor is if you took Auburn or Arkansas or Vanderbilt or Clemson or North Carolina, or even I think LSU is another one too. These teams that stacked 30-some home games against, really bad opponents in some cases. If you put them in Oregon State shoes and made them travel as much as Oregon State had to travel, would they be as good? That's the thing that I think the committee needs to look at a little bit unequal weight in Oregon State's favor.
I totally agree, because they have the home games stacked, and so the Beavers this season have not. And also, there is, am I being just mean? There's such an SEC bias.
Oh, there is. No, you're not being mean. When you've got, 10,000 seat stadiums down there, the SEC mantra, it means more, Ron, kind of gets me sometimes, because I think West Coast sports mean a lot too. But with baseball, you're just you look historically, Oregon State's an enigma, being a northern climate team. They are.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's so true. That's such a big factor, knowing that this program, built by Pat Casey, when he came in and did such a tremendous job. And Mitch, my first Oregon State assignment, Brendan, when KPAM got the Beavers for 4 years back in 2007, my first assignment was Omaha 07. Oh. And I'll never forget, I was just right behind home plate when they started the dog pile. Wow. And watching Mitch Canham as a player, and now look at him. He'd love to see that happen as a manager. And I would, you brought up Arkansas just because of what happened in, what was it, 2018?
Of course, yes.
I wouldn't mind seeing them come to town, and a lot of people holding up 2018 signs. But
I mean, yeah,
I'm kidding on that, but that's in my mind. I could see that happening.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. Again, catching up with Ron Callan, Oregon State radio voice here on the Rip City Drive. Ron, appreciate your time. We kind of talked a little bit about it, but one last thing I want to get your thoughts on baseball. One of the latest D1 baseball projections is where I think in my heart of hearts Oregon State will probably land, is just outside of the top 8. You never know, but just my gut tells me I think they'll be a little bit on the outside looking in. But in this latest projection, they had Oregon as the number 8 national seed paired up with number 9 Oregon State. Could you imagine a super regional in PK Park if everything went chalk with a shot to Omaha on the line?
Well, I do know that Oregon State players would be beyond motivated because of what happened during the regular season. And, I mean, they still talk about that. I had a good conversation with Cannon Reeder, who's amazing. And, he says, hey, we're ready for anything. We don't care who we're playing. The bottom line is, though, they would love to get a little bit of payback against a really good Oregon team. There's no doubt about it. I mean, but, they've had a whole different kind of schedule than the Beavers. So I just admire this team. I admire the program. I was blessed that I got a chance to have a little taste of it for 4 games, hey, but Mike Parker, when I think about college baseball announcers, he might be the best in the country just because he is so he's so deep. He knows so much, and he cares so much.
Oh, I mean, Mike's attention to detail, and I've heard that before, where people have come up to me and said, I think Mike's best sport is baseball, and it's not uncommon to see a play-by-play announcer that does a couple things. You have fans who kind of like one thing, but I'm with you. I love listening to Mike. Those legendary calls in 06, 07, and 18 really stand out. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and personally, Ron, I've been saying this week, for that factor alone, if things could go chalk and we have some, Civil War baseball with a shot to Omaha on the line, I'll take that, man. Sign me up right now.
I would love that too. There's no doubt about it, Brendan.
But again, just a couple more things here with Ron Callan here on the Rip City Drive. I want to switch gears a little bit, Ron. Talk a little Oregon State women's basketball with you. Not only are you the play-by-play for women's basketball, but last time you and I talked, I think it was spring football. I was like, Ron, I got to hear more about your national anthem, how many of them you've started to sing now. And you are, an extraordinaire when it comes to singing national anthems. Just give me a little backstory, how that started for you, and how many of them can you and have you sung at Oregon State games now?
Well, now you're talking national anthems, but I've never been asked. I never have sung the USA anthem. In 2016, when they went to the Final Four, what a great season they had. Ruth Hamblin, she was called the Canadian Hammer back in 2016. She would stand so tall and so proud for the U.S. anthem. So I would watch her. And, in another life, back when I was about your age, I was doing a lot of musicals. I was in operas. I was trying, my mom forced me to start singing when I was like 7 years old.
Yeah,
but then I fell in love with it. So I ended up singing in 2016 the Canadian national anthem. 2 Beaver players were Canadians and 2 UCLA players were Canadians. So tears were flowing. So
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that very well, Ron. Yeah, I sure do.
Yeah. So then we had a junior named Colby Oram who came up to me after the game. She goes, Ron, you're going to sing that next year for me, right? And so I did that. And then the next year, Marie Gulish, who's probably could be one of the greatest players ever to play at Oregon State.
Awesome.
I mean, she played in the Olympics for Germany last summer and was a standout. She said, how about the German anthem? And so I said, well, yeah, okay. And so I sang that in German with her dad. So I kind of eased into the more difficult anthems with her dad. So that turned out. And then next year I sang the Polish anthem for Joe Grimick. 2020, I sang the Serbian anthem for Jovana Subasic, and then we had COVID, and then I came back and did Jelena Mitrovic. She's also Serbian, and Paraguay, Andrea Aquino. And then we had a year off, and this past year I did it for Kelsey Reese, who was part of that amazing women's team that came out of nowhere after losing just about the entire team, right, to win the WCC and go to March Madness. So that was a season so memorable. And I enjoyed singing the Australian anthem because I got one in English again. So that it was a lot of fun. But no, I just think those players come so far. They face a new culture. and they stand for our anthem on their senior. It's only on their senior day then they get their song. So next year, I think we've got Brazil for sure. We know that with Tejeda coming back. So that's the next plan. So get there early next senior day, because it's nice to have the crowd go crazy for the player, because Beaver fans, whatever sport, they have such a base that cares so much, and that's one reason why I love broadcasting in Corvallis, because I mean it's a big deal in Corvallis, and that makes it fun.
Catching up with Ron Callan, Oregon State Radio play-by-play voice for women's basketball, filled in for baseball this last weekend. And, Ron, that's one of the things I really admire about you is, you were, when, like we talked about earlier, when you and I first started working together, down that Final Four run, I remember, making that trip myself when I was student radio and whatnot. And you can kind of probably remember, it was kind of before women's basketball started to go as mainstream as it was now. And I've always appreciated, that you've, definitely tried to, bring awareness to women's basketball. And it's definitely one of those things that, we've all seen, Scott Rueck and what he's been able to do. And this last season, I mean, just to echo what you said, I mean, it was awesome. Not only for the program, Ron, but just the university, everything they've been through. To have a run like that was something the university could hang their hat on for sure.
Yeah, and players who stepped up, who kind of played minor roles before this season. I mean, Kennedy Schuler from Barlow High School in Gresham, he had 3 buzzer beaters to win key games, 2 during the season and then 1 against Gonzaga in the semifinals. I mean, and she's tough, and she'll be one of the team leaders this year. They've got a whole host of new players coming in, including 3 from Australia. Right. And one is 6'5", who actually played for North Carolina State when they went to the Final Four in 2024. And then they have a gal who's 6'8", Nene Sao, who played at Utah but has been injured and hasn't played much. But, Scott always likes to have the bigs, but he likes to have quick guards who can play shutdown defense. And 2 of the players from Australia are guards who can hit the threes. They're in the high 30s in percentages. So, I think the future's bright. One more season in the WCC, and I know the coaching staff would love to make it a 2-year sweep before the new Pac-12 begins in 2026.
Absolutely. And just kind of echoing that too, Ron, I think, obviously the players, like you mentioned, stepping up. I think one thing that was kind of underrated is I think last year was arguably, you can make an argument for a couple different years, but I think last year's Scott Rueck coaching job was amongst the best he's ever done. And it was just, I have such tremendous respect for Scott and known him for quite a while. And, then you look at this offseason, right? Unlike the year before, they weren't gutted. They made some decent additions. Like, I think there's actually something pretty exciting brewing and building into next year with these additions that you talked about, bringing back some core of ladies. And I think they're going to be pretty darn good next season. What are you thinking?
Well, the players who are coming back, who stayed, I mean, besides, Kennedy and a couple of others, they all had their first year in Corvallis, and a lot of them, a couple are from Spain, one from Colombia, and so they understand the Scott Rueck defense, and that's always been a key to his success, playing shutdown defense, and out-rebounding everybody. I could see a lot of excitement this year with them, and I'm really looking forward to it. When I started doing in 2007 women's basketball, nobody wanted the job. I said, I'll do it, because I had covered the Huskies in the 80s when they were really good,
right,
in Seattle. And so I have had so much fun doing women's basketball, because it's not the men's game, it's below the rim, but there's so much teamwork and strategy, and they care as much as anybody else. So, I mean, that's why it's actually caught on, and now you've got superstars that what you see in the WNBA, and it's awesome.
Oh, it totally is. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Ron. Like, I remember when I got to Oregon State and, there weren't quite as many broadcasting opportunities on the men's side for student radio, but it was like, hey, you want to broadcast this Final Four bound team? I'm like, of course.
Of course.
So, yeah, no, absolutely some great overlapping memories there too, Ron. Ron, really appreciate your time. It was great to catch up, my friend, and look forward to talking whenever we talk next, whether that's at a baseball game, whether that's football, fall camp, getting ready for the year, man. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you have a great rest of your night and summer. It was great catching up with you, Ron.
Brendan, thank you. Right now, it's McDavid and Draisaitl. I'm trying to get them to beat the Stars, okay? So it's the Oilers.
Got
That's
you.
who I'm rooting for today.
Absolutely.
All right,
that's Ron Callan, everybody. Appreciate Ron. Known him for a long time. He was, or he is rather, the man called the Oregon State Long Beach State Series this last weekend. You can continue to catch him constantly fighting for the Oregon State women's basketball team. Love what he brings and the energy and passion from the women's basketball side. We'll take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be putting a bow tie on the show here on a Wednesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive, final segment of the day here on a Wednesday afternoon. Started off as a sunny day, evolved into a cloudy day. I feel like I've said that 3-4 times this week. Man, we just can't seem to quite figure out this whole summer thing in Oregon. I keep hearing, things are getting hotter, right? Things are getting a little warmer out there. Maybe the average temps are going up a little bit more. All right, well, can we see it? We're into May. I'd like to see one of the quote changes coming through, and maybe instead of these cloudy-ish Mays, let's start getting some 80-degree Mays. Maybe wishful thinking, but nevertheless, cannot wait for the nice weather to really take hold here in the Pacific Northwest. Because as I like to tell everybody, for 8 months out of the year, Pacific Northwest can be a little tougher if you're not the biggest fan of rain. But for the summer, man, I will put it up against anybody, anywhere in America. I think Oregon, Pacific Northwest summers are undeniable, unbeatable when you can get, 80, 90 degrees and still have the unbelievable green and scenery we have here. Summers in this state rock when we don't get June gloom. So, again, I'm looking out my window right now. A lot of May gloom out there. So let's start having that sun crank through a little bit. But nevertheless, let's check in on the NBA, final segment of the day here on the Rip City Drive. The Knicks and Pacers are underway. Just 8 minutes left in the second quarter. That game on TNT Max. Been a great game so far. The Knicks currently hold a 46-45 lead over the Indiana Pacers. Just looking at the top scorers so far in that game tonight. For the Pacers, you got Miles Turner leading the way with 11 points. Pascal Siakam with 6. Aaron Naismith with 5. Pretty balanced scoring. TJ McConnell throwing in 7 points off the bench. Knicks, meanwhile, led by the 12 from Mikal Bridges and the 10 from Karl Anthony Towns, 9 from Jalen Brunson. Again, the way that this series looks like it's shaking out, at least early on, this is how I expect this series to go. These are two teams that I think are pretty evenly matched, playing some great basketball in the postseason. I think the Knicks do have the advantage as far as just the star power, having a little bit more talent. But again, these Pacers, man, watch out. They play good basketball. They are gritty. They're tough. They've got championship experience with Rick Carlisle and Pascal Siakam. So, this series intrigues the heck out of me from that perspective. So I'm very curious to see how that shakes out. Again, the Knicks currently hold a 3-point lead over the Pacers. Curious to see also in this game just how many minutes, and see the overall, the Knicks are probably one of those teams that running the shorter rotations, something we talked about with Travis Demers yesterday. But I'm curious to see as we kind of get deeper into the playoff, because if you were to put my feet to the fire, I think the Knicks will take this series. But with their short rotation, will they continue to keep guys fresh as we get deeper into the playoff? Because that's one thing on the Western side, that's one thing I really like about Oklahoma City. I don't know if there's anybody in the playoffs that can challenge Oklahoma City's depth at this point. I mean, Indiana's not bad either, but, the Knicks and Timberwolves kind of run more of a shorter-ish rotation, but very curious to see ultimately how that shakes out too. And again, just kind of wrapping up a few other things here on the show as well. As we mentioned, some big takeaways, big highlights from today. The NFL okayed flag football, and we've heard kind of the kind of ramifications of that. I want to go ahead and hear from Roger Goodell one more time, and he talked about just why the NFL allowed players to go to the Olympics and what he thinks the positives are. Again, Roger Goodell talking about flag football taken on in the 2028 Olympics.
I think this news represents a great opportunity for the sport, for the NFL. It's truly the next step in making NFL football and football a global sport for men and women of all ages and all opportunities across the globe. We think that's the right thing to do, and this is a big step in accomplishing that. For our players, we think it's a tremendous opportunity for them to represent their country, to compete for a gold medal, which is the pinnacle of global sports. It's something that I think all professional athletes, and we have two here today that will speak to this, that across many different sports, the opportunity to play for your country and to win a gold medal or any medal is a wonderful and an honor to be able to do.
I'm really glad they figured out how to make this work. And I go back to what we talked about with Dan Pizzuta back in hour number 1. He's like, this is all great in theory, but once there's the first big injury, what's going to happen as far as the NFL players playing it? Otherwise, are we going to be looking at more college players? Because it's true, right? A guy rolls an ankle, no big deal. But and you don't want to wish injuries at all. And I'm totally not throwing that negative energy out there, but it's reality. Like, you get one guy who goes to the Olympics and, maybe has an ACL injury, an MCL injury, something that's going to limit them from getting into the flow of their season, which is already going to be starting at the end of the Olympics anyway. That's where you could see some trickiness. But nevertheless, we'll see. Roger Goodell is one of the best, capitalists out there as far as being able to make money for his league and run his league, like a Fortune 500 company. And, Roger Goodell's no fool. He knows that the NFL has, money to make off this, and most importantly, can get their name out there. This is what he had to say about the benefit of international markets, too.
I think the potential for us to grow is there. It's the greatest opportunity for growth. I mean, we already have 200+ million fans here in the States. So we're not giving up on the States and continuing to expand here. But the international is just, it's an open market for us. We're introducing the game. We're sharing our game. And the fans are reacting to it in an extraordinary way. So we're excited about our potential. Yes, I do see 16 regular season games. I think that will happen sometime in the very near future.
Yeah, again, like Roger Goodell said, they're just looking to grow, and growth means more money, more revenue for the league, all these things. And I think, the Olympics do have a real worldwide feel compared to maybe the NFL, which is still pretty dominant in the United States. I know they have their international games, but you get football and some sort of football and these players' recognizable, auras, the Justin Jeffersons of the world. I think you're going to get more people probably nationally start to be interested in football, even if it is just a small version of it being scaled down, playing flag football. Nevertheless, that's going to do it for us here on the Rip City Drive for a Wednesday. Make sure to join us tomorrow. We'll be back. TBD on exactly what time. The Hillsboro Hops got an early game tomorrow afternoon, so we'll see what time we join you guys in the afternoon. But we will be here tomorrow afternoon. Talk to you guys. Sean Hyken will be in studio with us as well. Very pleased for that. But tonight, we got more Hillsboro Hops baseball on deck. They got another game with the Everett Aqua Sox. We'll be passing it off to those guys. Hope they all have a great broadcast. This has been the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter.